The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today.
Welcome to the journey. My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of the journey. I want to continue our series on a couple different reflections. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the power of gratitude, and last week we talked about that this idea behind looking at my part whenever something unfolds, in Jocko's work regarding the idea of extreme ownership. And today, I want to talk a little bit about um, when something happens and it doesn't go the way that we might want the outcome to be, how can we learn from mistakes? I think back growing up, as many of you know, I was a competitive athlete for the majority of my growing up years. Started competing in different sports in grade school, and then in middle school was football, wrestling, and track. And then continue that into high school. And then my sophomore year started competitive bodybuilding. And I remember at that time, because it was such a foundational transition in my how I viewed myself, my identity, that and how in the aspect of how I performed, that seemed to be that there was a lot of energy around the idea of how I did from an outcome standpoint, how I placed in a bodybuilding competition, if I would have won or lost in wrestling or in track. And then in football, there was this element of because of the team that I was on at the time, at least our varsity years, we struggled. The conference that we competed in was one of the top conferences, very strong conference, one of the top conferences in the state at the time. And I recognized that if it was only based upon the outcome, my sense of fulfillment and my sense of joy, then it was going to be a pretty fragile scenario. And that's when I started transitioning to what can I control, kind of going back to what we talked about with Jocko, is being able to control how much effort that I put into preparation, how much effort I put um, into practice, how much effort I put into the game, and being mindful and intentional about not taking any plays off, about giving 100% whenever I was on the field. That way, it had less to do with what the outcome was and had more to do with how did I individually um, perform. Not necessarily perform as far as executing a play really well, but more from a standpoint of my uh, being able to control my effort. I believe also at that time period is that um, I became very conscious of not wanting to make mistakes, um, wanting to get things right. I think there was an element of that in academic. I think it played a part probably with me socially, as well as from an element when I was performing in activities. I think of times when this fear of looking foolish or fear of not getting it right held me back from exploring, being curious, taking those risks. The concern about what would I look like, what would happen if this if I would have made a mistake, or I didn't seem to get it. I mean, speaking of, even with these podcasts, I know that it took me a long time, to be able to get to a place where I was willing to, weekly put myself out there, regarding that. And I remember talking to a couple individuals, and in particular, Dalton Bullard, who does the production, and the producing of this, of the journey. And he talked about the idea that, let's give it our best effort. And by the 50th episode, we'll be better than the first. And by the 100th episode, we'll be better than 50. And by 200, we'll be better than 100. And now we're creeping up on over 300 episodes. And there is a level of familiarity and a willing of, maybe even, because of that familiarity, even some comfortability to that. So today, when I'm being mindful, because I can default into, wanting to be, conservative and not risk being vulnerable and looking either foolish or looking like I don't know what I'm, doing. When I'm being mindful, I intentionally prepare for, something, but then being willing to take that risk of trying to do something new, recognizing that something may not go right. And when that thing that doesn't go right, am I open to learning from it? This idea of being able to take a risk and knowing that I can learn from it, and that if nothing else, I won't make that exact same, mistake again. I think of, a quote that I use when I do some of my workshops on developing resilience. Of the 5 steps of developing resilience, learning from mistakes is one of the key things. And one of the quotes, that we use is, "Don't be afraid, to make mistakes. Just be afraid of not learning from them." Let me say that again. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just be afraid of not learning from them. And another quote is, "Most people will learn from their mistakes if they aren't too busy trying to deny them." Most people will learn from their mistakes if they aren't too busy denying that they happened. And I think this goes back to what we talked about last week with Jocko and extreme ownership of, how do we, when we, do our due diligence, when we do our homework in the preparation phase, when we put ourselves out there and taking a chance, it may not 100% work. And that's okay, as long as we can own our part, learn from those mistakes, and then take an element of innovation and creativity to see if we can then improve on the process going forward. So during this time period, regardless if it's in, an educational setting, if it's in a work setting, if it's in a relationship setting, um, maybe it's going to be in something silly like trying something new, or trying a new activity, or trying a new workout. Regardless of what it is, giving yourself permission to take that risk, do the preparation, and recognize that if something doesn't go right the way that you want to, you have that option by taking extreme ownership to learn from what didn't go right and then improve on the process from there. I encourage you to, be curious, have that courage to be vulnerable, and let that light shine within you. As always, thank you very much for being here, and look forward to being with you next week.